Well, good evening. This is Hound Dog Steve wishing you a very good evening, and welcome back to my channel. It's good to see you all again, and I think we need to have a little conversation about the weather, the kind of weather that we are experiencing now worldwide. We've reached a point where I think that just about everyone now can see that there's something terribly amiss with the weather, and the spring that we've had this year has been absolutely devastating, but this has now become year over year for the last, I think, 3 or 4 planting seasons that we've seen extremely wet weather. That just, the cold and the damp just lingers on right into June. I think down in the States they're only about 60% planted. They're normally 90 to 95% planted by now, and of course we passed that magic window when you can replant your seeds. And the seeds that have been planted, as you'll see in some of the clips that I found, are not top grade. And I know around here some of the hay fields are just drying up now. The weather has been very, very up and down, but it looks like we've got a clear spell, so we can at least get some hay off the fields. But the hay is not that great quality either. And of course, when you have these long, damp springs, it brings into play other things like diseases, molds and rusts, and all kinds of terrible things that can affect the crops. Now, there's some really big issues about this because we as a civilization now have reached a point where the vast majority of people have lost those skills of either foraging in the woods for food, or growing your own food in the backyard, or as part of some kind of cooperative. It is starting to come back. Certainly around here there are some cooperatives, which is great to see. Farmers markets and that kind of stuff are encouraging people to get into this kind of lifestyle, but it's still not a lot. There's a lot of people live in the cities, and you have to remember that we have about maybe a week's worth of food in strategic reserve as far as grocery stores and storage depots, refrigeration units and that kind of thing around the country. So that isn't very long. It certainly isn't long enough for you to transition from buying food from the grocery store to going out and planting that food, or gathering that food, or hunting for that food to try and replace some of the protein that you are no longer getting. And of course, if we're in that situation, it's the stuff that will be available, if it's available, will be out of reach financially. And we'll see some of the corn prices and hay prices have doubled this year. So there's a knock-on effect here from hay doubling in price to the cost of cattle and cattle feed. So the cost of beef is affected, this kind of stuff. So this kind of food issue tends to ripple through every single part of our economy. And it's interesting to note, I'm just going to flip back a little bit, because I think what we're on is really a big cycle. We came out of an ice age about 10,000, 12,000 years ago now, and so as we climb out of that ice age, there is a peak period in time, and it's been for the last 10,000 years. Now, I don't know whether it's been a climb up the side of that temperature increase, or we're at the actual peak and we've gone up and over and down the other side, but the last 12,000 years have been the absolute sweet spot for the Gulf Stream to run at such a speed that we had equal seasons. The temperatures on the planet moderated, and what's interesting about this is because when we discovered South America and the people down there and Mexico and so on and so forth, we found an agrarian-based society. Okay, and when they studied the history of these peoples, they found that these people discovered agriculture and started using agriculture on a large scale, comparatively large scale, to hunter-gatherer, and a more settled kind of life rather than nomadic. It was basically equal. They both civilizations, which basically had no contact, certainly no meaningful contact with each other, discovered agriculture at the same time, and that's because the weather had just stabilized enough to have equal seasons, because when you grow food, you need a balanced seasonal change. You need those good 4 seasons, or 3, as they have in California and Mexico, so they get a double planting down there. We just get a single planting up here in Canada and northern US. But we still need those stable seasons. You still need to know that you can plant on or around the 15th of May, and that you can pull a crop off the fields by September the 15th, somewhere in that period where the weather is going to be clement enough. You're going to get enough rain and enough sunshine to make those crops grow to full height and fruit yield. And so I now believe that system is destabilizing. I think there are several reasons. The main driver of this, I believe, is the sun and the increase in cosmic rays, which increase cloud cover, which increase the albedo effect. That's the reflective ability of the clouds to reflect sunlight back out into space. But there's also the Gulf Stream, which has been slowing since 1995. It's slowed by 50% since 1995. That is absolutely huge. And because we have been warming, we've of course been just coming out of the Little Ice Age, which ended in 1840. And so we have had global warming, that's absolutely true. And there has been a melt in the glaciers, and they have freshened the water that comes down from the North Atlantic and meets up with the Gulf Stream coming up from around the Central Americas and the equatorial regions. Okay, so because the water is fresh, it's not as dense. Salt water is a lot more dense than fresh water, so it falls or descends with a lot less energy. Okay, and that is why the Gulf Stream has slowed. And so this dramatically affects the weather, it affects the jet stream, and that's of course what we're seeing now is a destabilizing of the jet stream, and we are not going to know what weather is coming at us in the near to, as far as we can see it, certainly as far as my lifetime now, for the rest of my life, I will see bizarre weather, I believe, and it will be up to us to survive the weather. The weather is not going to change on our behalf, and I think even if cutting CO2 emissions would make any difference, and I don't think that it would, because it is such a tiny fraction. It's half a percentage of the atmosphere. It is incredibly small, and but even if it was a major player in all of this, it's too late. It is too late to change anything. We now have to move into mitigation status. Okay, we now have to start figuring out how we're going to deal with the fallout of uneven weather patterns. Okay, so let's flip over to these articles that I found. I'll go through them as quickly as possible, but they really do show how devastating this spring was and how much it's going to affect the food prices this year, and that is crucial. But we'll talk about that when we come back. Okay, here we go. Okay, this is from the Chicago Tribune. Because of historic rains, less than half the normal amount of corn has been planted in Illinois. The next weeks are make or break for farmers. Following an unseasonably wet spring, some farm fields that would normally be filled with burgeoning corn stalks and soybean plants are holding so much water they could pass for ponds. Even those without standing water are barren mud pits because the ground is too saturated to plant. Farmers who managed to find a window to plant their seeds are now seeing crops grow stunted by heavy rainfall. And you can see here just how wet that farmland is, and of course those houses sitting knee deep in the water. That's the Mississippi River, by the way. Okay, so this is from the Integrated Crop Management, delayed planting and diseases in 2019. This growing season delayed planting combined with the continued cool and wet conditions have taken their toll on crops that were planted in the brief periods of optimum weather. Given that there is already delayed emergence and the wet, cool weather patterns are expected to continue, we could very well see the continued delayed growth and development of crops. This means we can also expect reaching grain fill later in the growing season, which creates a window of opportunity for plant diseases to impact total yield. The earlier a plant disease occurs during the grain fill, the more likely it is to negatively impact the yield. And this is horrible scenes. More rain threatens areas swamped by record floods in central southern USA. A levee across the Arkansas River has breached, prompting a flash flood warning and evacuation of a rural area in western Arkansas. Emergency officials have recommended that about 160 homes be evacuated. And here are just horrible scenes down in Jefferson County and Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So, significant flash flooding in April-May 2019. And the black dots are a flash flood or debris flow report. The light green is flash flood or flood watch. And the dark green is flash flood warning. So you can see how much of America is covered with water right now. And here is 16 photographs. Oh my God, can you imagine? Can you imagine? No, I can't. So you can see how this is going to affect food production. Yeah, imagine driving along that highway. And look at the trains almost underwater too. This is from AccuWeather. AccuWeather predicts substantial 2019 corn and soybean yield shortfall. There you go. This is April 10th, 2019. Floodwaters from the Missouri River destroyed grain silos and washed corn out of them on a farm in Bellevue, Nebraska. And this corn is all ruined. This is your strategic reserve corn. And it is ruined. And here you can see this is corn futures, and look at that. They've gone from a low of 340 to 430. That is quite a jump. And this is just the beginning. When they realize that all that's happening right now are estimates. This is just the beginning. And of course this is worldwide. From The Guardian, Lincolnshire flooding, hundreds of homes evacuated. Hundreds of homes have been evacuated in a Lincolnshire town following severe flooding, as the local MP warned that residents are by no means out of the woods yet. And of course the other thing, this is Saturday 22nd of June, places that have been deserts are now flooding. Tajikistan and Afghanistan, 5 killed. Afghanistan, more flash floods. South Asia, storms and rain kill over 100 in India, Pakistan and Afghanistan. Iraq and Syria, flooding hits Syria. Refugee camps displace thousands near Tigris River in Iraq. And the stories just go on and on. Here's some other pictures from Afghanistan. Flash floods. Middle East, braces for more flooding. So the old places, the ancient places are flooding where there are deserts now, and the places that were fertile are now drying up. How interesting. And here we go from the Independent. Hundreds of thousands of cows drown after Australia sees a year's worth of rain in a week. And here is the Land out in Australia. Crocodiles and snakes wash up as Australia hit by huge floods. To see the cattle spread across these yards not moving, it made you feel sick in the stomach, she said. Prime Minister Scott Morrison told reporters we are expecting hundreds of thousands in terms of stock losses. This will be heartbreaking to these communities that have been experiencing years of drought, only to see that turn into a torrential inundation. So this is an interesting search. Google, a year's worth of rain fell in 2 hours, 2019. And the list is endless. One of the wettest Junes on record, some on hold for the time being. At least one dead as parts of the Gulf Coast inundated with a month's worth. Once-in-a-century floods hit northeast Australia. UK weather flash floods cause chaos as a month's rain falls in an hour. And you're going to see stories like this over and over again. 73 million results worldwide. And you could even refine that question and see what comes up. I mean, it's just incredible. So here you go, here goes your meat prices through the roof because that's all your beef cattle. So let's just take a little look at the Michigan Summer Outlook 2019. What's up with our weather? What to expect? Okay, so there you go. There is the divides. Above average temperatures, below average temperatures, above average temperatures. Okay, and these lines here, okay, these will be where all the real storms take place. And the storms will tend to follow these lines too. And again, you see very polarized. San Francisco, Seattle, all going to be colder. Quebec, Minneapolis, Detroit, Boston. And down here. But this is all your grain growing belt around here. That's where there's going to be flooding. And here's the summer precipitation, June through August. And here again, here is your grain belt right here. This is all your growing takes place basically within these boundaries. So look out for some terrible news in the fall as these crops turn out to be much less than expected. So why is this absolutely crucial? Well, if you look back in history, every collapse of civilization had somewhere in the mixture food costs rising. People couldn't afford the food, and of course, this is something that we do 3 times a day. We spend an awful lot of our time dealing with food, thinking about food, how we're going to prepare it, where we're going to get it from, what we're going to eat. So it takes up a big portion of our lives, and if we can't get food, boy, oh boy, oh boy. I read a Rand Corporation think piece on the carrying capacity of the planet, and we are well outstripping the carrying capacity, as well as running now into serious weather changes that are going to affect food production. And one of the little things I thought was really interesting, and it said that there has never been an exception to this in the history of humankind, and that is that when humans are faced with a choice between starving and raiding, humans raid. Okay, so where there is a food shortage, you are going to see raiding take place. This is so predictable, it's unbelievable. I'm hoping that because I'm in a smaller village and people are a lot more self-sufficient out in a rural area, that there'll be a lot more calm and there'll be a lot more food floating around. But as you can see with the losses in the US, and China of course is flooding. All of these places that never used to flood, the places that were deserts in the past, like North Africa, they're now flooding. They're getting all kinds of water. And those places that were breadbaskets for the world are now turning to drought. And of course, this is the other thing, as we saw with the weather map there, the polarization of the weather. And where you see those meeting points, that's where you're going to see the real turbulence. That's where you're going to see the serious storms where that hot and cold meet each other. So please, my friends, this is getting you got maybe a year, maybe 2 years tops before this weather becomes unbelievable. And mass production of food will become extremely limited, and we will really be up to ourselves to grow these resources for ourselves. You're going to see hunting and fishing is suddenly going to become a huge pastime again, as people look for alternate sources of protein that don't cost money. Because as I say, the big problem is going to be is if the protein, if the vegetables, if the grains are available, you probably won't be able to afford them. So think about that. Think about that seriously. Make some effort to try, even if it's in buckets on a balcony, to try and grow something for yourself, to get yourself into the mindset of these changes that are coming up. Because the other thing that plagues people is that when things move outside of normal parameters, if your living conditions move outside of normal parameters, you can get what's called cognitive dissonance sets in. And this is the kind of state of dysphoria where it makes it very, very difficult to try and cope even with the simplest of tasks around you. So start thinking along these lines, The warning signs are all there, whether it's global warming or global cooling. Now, I think we've turned the corner. We're now cooling or moderating, but whatever happens, it means that our weather is going to be incredibly unstable in the years to come, and we have to be a lot more self-sufficient. The government is not going to do it for you. Trust me, if they can't fix a pothole, they're not going to come rushing out and feeding you. They may bus you to a camp somewhere, if you're lucky. But this crisis, I think, is just going to be ongoing. Anyway, I hope this has motivated you to do something to try and mitigate these circumstances, even if it's thinking about it, even if it's moving to another location. If you live in an apartment in a city, maybe to get together with 2 or 3 friends and rent a farmhouse. You're going to put yourself in a much better position for surviving these weather changes that are coming up. Okay, well, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below, and please share this video. It really helps me when you do that. And in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we will talk very, very shortly. You take care now. See ya. Bye now.